Tips for Advancement Officers. Negotiating and Managing Private Grant Agreements, presented by the Office of Sponsored Projects. What are the benefits of increasing your awareness of the private grant process? Happier sponsors and donors, better agreements, plus more time to focus on the next opportunity. Happier donors. We know donors want to see their money being used to support the mission-related goals, not excessive admin. The less time spent going back and forward on award negotiation, the more confidence they'll have that SI operates efficiently and that the funding they give us will be well managed and used effectively. If you know the processes and parameters within which we operate in advance, then hopefully we can make the process of giving grant funding to SI as painless as possible for our donors. Better agreements. You'll be better positioned to identify and address potential obstacles or roadblocks at the start of the process, preferably before anything is put in writing. Advanced awareness of what we can and cannot accept in an agreement and what terms and conditions are likely to require additional reviews, vetting, or approvals will result in better agreements for SI. Better agreements allow us to uphold our mission and goals and demonstrate our integrity and promote overall confidence in our brand. What you'll learn from this training. You'll learn to identify what type of funding you're dealing with and the implications of having a grant. The proposal stage, budget preparation, identifying the principal investigator, aka the project director, negotiation processes, who needs to be involved and when, and awareness of how to effectively manage grant funding. What is a grant? A grant is a legally binding agreement from an external party to provide financial support for a specific program, project, or activity. Key characteristics of a grant. Any unspent funds are to be returned to the sponsor. Funds must be spent in accordance with an agreed-upon budget. Financial reports must be provided to the sponsor. Deviations from the stated grant terms require the sponsor's approval or notification to the sponsor. Smithsonian tests for determining grant versus gift. These definitions and processes may be different from other organizations that you have worked at. Source: Smithsonian Directive 318, Externally Funded Sponsored Projects. Additional Smithsonian tests. The period of performance is specified by the sponsor. Additional financial terms and conditions are specified by the sponsor. A research or performance report is required by the sponsor for evaluation purposes. Source: Smithsonian Directive 318, Externally Funded Sponsored Projects. Distinguishing features of a Fund Type 802 grant. 802 means private grants and contracts. Please note, private grants are still considered contributions and would count towards capital campaign goals. How are Fund 802 grants different from Fund 801 gifts? A unique designated code is established to support easy tracking of the project-specific budget and expenditures. This supports easy financial reporting to donor and auditors. The principal investigator, or lead, must be identified with the project and the designated code. This person is responsible for technical and financial oversight of the award. Spending can begin immediately, regardless of whether or not cash has been received. Budgeting. SI budget templates are available from your OSP grant administrator and OSP's PRISM website. Sponsor budget formats may differ from SI's formats. The budget may be submitted to the sponsor in their format. However, for internal purposes, the budget should always be processed through SI's budget template. We strongly recommend doing this before proposal submission, and it is required before award acceptance. Budgeting will also help identify any significant differences in the way that the sponsor wants costs to be accumulated versus the way the costs will be identified in SI's financial system, as well as any discrepancies with the application of SI's overhead rates. Ideally, proposal budgets should be reviewed by OSP prior to submission. In cases where OSP hasn't had an opportunity to review the budget before submission, and if there are errors, then you'll have to go back to the donor and request changes before we can sign the agreement. Overhead rates on private awards. Grants. A 10% overhead rate should be included on all proposals to private foundations for awards that will be classified as grants. If the sponsor has written guidelines on the percentage of overhead that can be included in the budget, SI will honor that restriction. If the sponsor allows a higher percentage than SI's normal rate, you have the option to use the sponsor's higher rate. If the sponsor has no written overhead restriction, you should include SI's normal rate of 10%. Overhead rates on private awards. Contracts. Proposals to corporate entities or proposals that would result in providing specific deliverables, for example, a good or service, to the sponsor is classified as a contract. Such contracts should include the approved government overhead rates. OSP can assist with calculation of these rates. In addition, a management fee of 4% must be added to the contract agreement, calculated on total direct costs. For example, a budget for a private contract might include salaries, benefits, travel, and contracts for total direct costs of $100,000. At 9.69%, GNC would be $9,690. At 6.23%, G&A would be $6,833, calculated on total direct costs plus amount of GNC, with a 4% management fee of $4,000, for a total indirect cost of $20,523 and total project cost of $120,523. Implications of being the lead PI on a grant: qualifications, responsibility, and COI reporting. Think carefully about who should be appointed as the lead PI on a grant. The choice of PI can potentially have a direct bearing on how well the donor perceives the project will be managed, both technically and in terms of excellent financial stewardship. The PI should have some level or direct responsibility or interest in the project being funded. PIs are responsible for managing the technical performance and financial aspects of the project and ensuring compliance with agreement terms and conditions. This includes timely and appropriate charging of allowable project expenditures to the designated code, monitoring of any budget restrictions and complying with any donor prior approvals for rebudgeting requests, and ensuring timely submission of technical and financial reports. New Conflict of Interest (COI) requirements. All PIs and co-PIs are required to submit a certified statement regarding relationship with the donor before the award is signed. All PIs and co-PIs are required to submit an annual COI, Form 1085. Negotiation parameters: cannot accept broad confidentiality clauses, cannot prevent disclosure of funding sources in publications, retain the right to publish, retain intellectual property rights. Baseline terms and conditions. Smithsonian Directive 318 includes baseline principles applicable to all awards. While we accept a donor's template as the starting point, OSP must review and approve prior to acceptance. OSP will consult with the unit director, OGC, and the appropriate undersecretary prior to accepting deviations from the guiding principles. Potential roadblocks: provision of personally identifiable information, or PII. Binding arbitration. Mediation is okay. Extraordinary administrative requirements, for example, audit, documentation, report on other expenses. Sticking points. Requests requiring the provision of personally identifiable information of SI employees, affiliates, or regents. PII includes date of birth, social security number, driver's license, or other government-issued ID number, etc. Source: SD 118 privacy policy, and indemnification clauses that do not meet SI requirements. More sticking points. Extraordinary administrative requirements, for example, donor requirement to have annual external project-specific audit. Detail source documentation required to be provided to donor to substantiate invoices or project expenditures. Detail expenditure reporting of other sources of project funding unrelated to the donor. Potential red flags. Requests for anonymity. Anonymity refers to a request by the donor that his or her identity not be made known to the public. A donor request for anonymity must be approved in consultation with the Office of General Counsel. More potential red flags. Gifts and grants that provide control to the donor over the contents of museum collections, programs, and/or exhibitions, or that would require involvement by the donor in directing the use and administration of the gift, and gifts and grants from which the donor may benefit directly or appear to benefit through the use of control of the funds. Payment instructions. Use the OSP lockbox. Earn interest immediately. It is important to use the payment information so that the payment is received in a timely way and credited ASAP to the proper account. This ensures the SI will start to earn interest on the funds right away. Having a check sent to your unit delays the deposit of the funds and involves more people handling the check, which means it could get lost or misplaced. Financial reporting requirements. OSP is responsible for preparing invoices and uses a standard invoicing format when possible. Transparency. It is strongly recommended that you work with the sponsor to obtain their agreement to SI's standard invoicing and/or financial reporting format. SI is required to classify costs in specific, predefined categories for audit and financial reporting purposes. OSP will prepare and certify financial reports using information from SI's financial system. Invoicing or reporting that requires customization outside of SI's approved cost categories is strongly discouraged. The department will be responsible for recategorizing and reordering costs into the sponsor format and provide a crosswalk to OSP before OSP will certify or authorize any financial reporting or invoice. Such customization often takes significant additional time and effort, particularly on the part of the unit, and can impact the timely submission of financial reports to donors. The unit may come to an agreement with OSP that any financial reports will be submitted to the sponsor by the unit or advancement officer. If the donor or an auditor questions a customized financial report or asks for financial records at a later date, the official SI financial books and records, or OSP reports, will be provided directly to the sponsor. Approvals obtained by OA. Board of Regents. All private grant agreements of $10 million or more. All naming recognition of facilities and space. The approval requirement must be included in proposals and agreements. Private grant agreements which require approval by the Board of Regents shall only be announced after approval has been granted. Undersecretary. All private grant agreements of $5 million plus. You may need approval from the Office of Advancement if there is a chance of conflict of interest or COI issues or a potentially inconsistent reputation, mission, or values. The unit director for all proposals and private grant and contract agreements pertaining to their unit, and OSP for all private grant and contract agreements. The Office of Advancement must be consulted prior to acceptance of private grant agreements if the agreement may create or be perceived as creating a conflict of interest, or if they are with a donor whose reputation, mission, values, or programs are inconsistent with or may appear to be inconsistent with the reputation, mission, values, or programs of the Smithsonian. OSP does not have authority to sign endowment agreements. Endowments are not grants. Necessary paperwork includes a proposal budget, signed proposal brief, and certification of financial interests. Before signing or accepting an agreement, the following information must be provided to OSP. Proposal, including budget if not previously provided. Signed proposal brief indicating the unit director or their authorized delegate has approved mission fit for their unit. The proposal brief must be signed by the PI supervisor, and the unit director. And certification of financial interests signed by the PI and co-PI. Certification of financial interests. Is your proposal to a private entity? If yes, do you have an equity interest in this sponsor? Will you receive a consulting fee or honorarium from this sponsor? Have you had sponsored travel paid by this entity within the last 12 months, not a previous grant? Do you have income or future income from this sponsor related to intellectual property rights? Everyone benefits from good fiscal stewardship. Donors are more likely to be repeat givers if they appreciate that SI takes seriously the fiscal stewardship of the funds they have provided us. Negative publicity can have significant and long-term effects. Points to remember: if you are involved with requesting funding from a governmental entity, whether local, state, federal, or international, you must involve OSP. All government funding requires OSP concurrence. Remember, it is likely you will not receive fundraising credit for government funding or for any contracts, private or government. OSP provides central advancement with all private award information on a bi-weekly basis, so they can enter it into the PANDA database. In order for spending to begin, there must be a signed agreement, a designated code, and the award amount versus spending budget authority. Once again, project spending can begin as soon as we have a signed or accepted agreement and the designated code has been set up. If the award has budget category spending restrictions or prior approvals, and the budget categories in the proposal or award cannot be easily translated into the corresponding SI budget categories, then OSP needs unit or advancement input to translate the budget into the SI format. The designated code cannot be set up until this has been provided. OSP will immediately set up a spending authority in ERP for your project once the agreement is finalized. If the sponsor has payment contingencies based on specific requirements, OSP may limit the amount of spending authority. Award amount versus spending authority, or budget. Why might budget authority be different than award amount? That could be due to conditional requirements, for example, verification of successful completion of Phase 1 before Phase 2 funding can be spent, can request advance funds if necessary, or cash not received in advance, rather projected to be received over an extended period. This will take into account prior experience with the donor and the unit's willingness to guarantee any shortfall. Why might the budget authority be different than award amount? If an award is interest-bearing, the budget will be increased when interest is posted. If bank fees are incurred, the budget will be reduced by that amount. Advance accounts. Time frame. Wait for the paperwork to be finalized. Wait for Regents' approval. Budget authority, less than spending. What are the benefits? Can immediately commit resources. Designated code. What are the risks? Requires unit director guarantee if funding doesn't materialize. Start date later than anticipated. Process. A formal request for advance funding must be submitted. Signatory requirements depend on size of advance being requested. Always requires unit director. Less than $100,000 requires director of OSP. Greater than $100,000 requires undersecretary for administration. Greater than $1 million requires undersecretary for administration plus the secretary. What's the benefit of advanced spending? First, you can immediately commit resources, for example, hiring, contracting, and it may be especially beneficial if there's a long lead time. A designated code available immediately so that it limits the need for costs to be transferred via a service request at a later date. What are the risks? The unit director must agree to cover any expenses incurred if the funding does not materialize. Is the start date of the award later than anticipated? Costs incurred prior to the start date cannot be charged to the award designated code, so must be covered by other sources of funding. When does spending authority end? Costs can be incurred and encumbered through the end date of the award period of performance. Invoices can be paid and charges posted within ERP after the project end date as long as the corresponding goods or services are provided or received prior to the end date. Important dates to remember. Usually, an award agreement has 3 clearly identifiable and separate dates. First, the start date. Second, the end date. And third, the due date for final financial reports, usually 90 days after the award end date. What if my award has no end date? Sometimes award agreements are silent on the end date and only give a due date for submission of final financial reports. In order to allow for the completion of accurate and supportable financial reports, costs have to be appropriately posted within the financial system before final financial reports can be generated or certified. Because of the processing time for payroll and accounts payable, we need to back into an earlier artificial end date in order to meet donor financial report due dates. To ensure timely submission of a financial report that's due 90 days after the end of the award, all costs should be posted within 30 to 45 days of the end date. In this way, they can be appropriately processed through the financial systems and allow for an accurate financial report that can be supported during an audit. Unspent balances. No cost extension. Request to retain balance. SI policy is to retain $500 or 3% of total award, noted on the bottom of the financial report form. Unspent balances, aka the leftovers. NCEs requested well in advance of the end date of the award. 30 days prior to the end date of the award is the minimal advisable time frame. OSP and the unit should work together to decide who should make the request to the donor. If the unit makes the request to the donor, OSP should be advised immediately and kept in the loop. If the project is complete and there is a more significant unspent balance, is there an option to contact the sponsor to request that the funds be retained for another project or added to another grant from the same donor? When the agreement is silent on what to do with unspent balances, SI policy is to retain the hire of $500 or 3% of total award value of unspent balances. This is noted on OSP final financial reports. We will return all unspent funds if specifically instructed to do so by the donor after the submission of the final financial report. When should you contact OSP? Proposal preparation. Provide award documents to OSP and ask questions about award terms. For grant award signature. Significant project timing delays. Potential issues with the payment of pledges due, potential scope changes, changes in spending patterns that require prior approval if you need to provide a financial report to the donor. When will OSP contact you or the PI prior to due date for outstanding payments to request a copy of interim and final technical reports? Last 90 days of award, award closeout, large unspent balance, prompt for no cost extension on end date, and prior to the return of unspent funds. Thank you. Please contact OSP with any questions or concerns. You can reach us at ospmail@si.edu or by phone 202-633-7110.